So we're the National Lottery Community Fund. I recognise lots of people in the room. I've worked with a lot of people locally. And for those who don't know me, I live locally. So I live in Rother, and it's kind of the lottery's approach now in that we have local funding officers. You have good experience of the sector locally in the areas where they're working. So I have worked with and supported quite a lot of the organisations we currently support and have a fairly good overview of the local picture, I like to think. So all I'm going to cover here is who our team are, what our purpose and priorities are at the moment, which is an ever-moving feast given the circumstances we all find ourselves in, what our current funding offer is, who we can fund, and how you can apply, which again has changed, but I think become more simple. So hopefully that will be good news for people. And bear in mind that I can't see the chat, so any questions will come to me later, and I can only see the screen in front of me. So we are the Kent and Sussex team. So that's we sit within the London and South East hub, and all communication goes to the London and South East hub. So the email that you will be given at the end is the London and South East email, and that comes. Anything then within the Rother patch will be allocated to me. So our overall funding manager is Jane Haddett. Many of you will have met Jane because Jane was the funding officer for my patch before I took over from her. Jane now manages the whole of Kent and Sussex, and I sit within East Sussex and Kent. So I cover really Hastings up to kind of the High Weald area and then over to Folkestone. But because my background's environmental projects, I also sometimes pick up specialist work around climate change and environmental funding that we have here. You may also meet Angie Beresford. So Angie covers Wilden and crosses over around Bexhill area, so actually picks up some of the patch as well. So those are the people you're most likely to be talking to when you come to lottery. I think lots of people know a lot about us, so I'm not going to spend ages talking about this because I think the devil's in the detail when we're looking at local causes. But there are some really good headline figures here. So national lottery players contribute 30 million to good causes every week, which is a phenomenal amount. We distribute around 600 million a year. That's actually a very low estimate. We actually funded 760 million in the year before last. And in the current year, the financial year just ended, and there was an additional 200 million added to that, which was the DCMS money. I think it was announced back from central government that we would be given 350 million, and 200 million of that went to reaching communities. So that was us funding very specific one-year projects in response to the coronavirus pandemic. And a lot of that money went locally. Locally, there was a really impressive response to the pandemic, and lots of really exciting community action was funded by that money. Some of those are coming back in for continuation, and I can talk about that later. So what do? We support people and communities to thrive is our overarching tag, if you like. This means we support ideas and activities that matter to the people and the communities they live in. And we try to use our funding and our relationships to help create stronger, more connected communities. So one thing we're getting much better at more recently is we recognise we have, as the people holding the giant checkbook, we have a very privileged oversight of the area. And that enables us to pick up a lot of knowledge and learning along the way of what works, what doesn't work. We don't want people to be afraid to fail, because actually failure provides a great deal of, what doesn't work gives us a great deal of learning too. So I think we are becoming better at taking risk and supporting you to take risk and sharing the learning that comes from that. And we support charities and community organisations to be vibrant, diverse and active. That's what we aim to do. Certainly in the last year, we've seen a lot of hiccups to that, because we are, with the inevitable move away from statutory funding for an awful lot of community work, we are now finding ourselves increasingly funding basic needs services. We, in the last year, we fund far more food banks, domestic violence projects, rape crisis centres, child mental health projects, human trafficking projects, things that 10 years ago or even 5 years ago would not have been seen as the lottery's domain when we were funding what we now call the nice to haves. We are unfortunately finding ourselves in a position where we're increasingly having to fund the essential to have. But this is our vision. This is what, given best case scenario, this is what we like to fund. And we talk very much about people in the lead. And I would say, honestly, if you're an applicant, people in the lead is probably the reason that if you're going to get a no, it's very likely to be that your project was not considered sufficiently people in the lead. And by this, we mean, how have you involved in a meaningful way the community and the beneficiaries in the project that you want to deliver? Not just in asking them if they want it, but have they been involved in what it looks like? Is your organisation user-led? have the beneficiaries been involved in planning and responding to that need that we find? We also talk about people being strengths-based, and really for us that means it's supporting the people to build on the knowledge and skills and experience they already have and the change they want to make. And that can be in terms of generous leadership. What do you do that is unique to you, and can you support other people to be better at that? It's also something, and it's not explicit here, but a lot of our funding criteria is very much relatable to what they were talking about previously at Rother, in that we do want to fund shiny new things, and we do like to see innovation, but we also fund core funding. So the difference between myself and the previous speaker is that Lottery can now fund core. So we can fund your daily running costs, and we fund salaries. We don't expect to see a brand new project every time. We don't want you to reinvent the wheel. If you're doing something that works and it's needed, and you can prove that it works and it's needed and why, and that you're the right person to do it, we are able to fund you to continue to do that work. So you don't always have to come up with a shiny project. It's really important that you're connected. If you can demonstrate a good understanding of what else is going on in your community and how you're going to complement that, and not, very critically, not compete with it. I had a very sad situation last year where 3 organisations who are very close to each other geographically all came in for a very similar request for a very similar project, and effectively knocked each other out of the ring. They talk to each other. Pool resources, come in as partnerships, try to collaborate where you can. We recognise as funders, and I think through local authority commissioning, that necessarily organisations have been forced into a competitive, the sector has inevitably become more competitive, but we really want to try and support the sector to be collaborative, share resources, share knowledge, share skills. That's definitely a move that we are looking towards. So our priorities are stronger relationships, bringing you together, bringing communities together, supporting organisations to work together, shared and sustainable projects, but also around the places that matter to people. Last year, there was an absolute decline in funding capital projects. So things like village halls, new roofs, community play parks, the things that we've traditionally been a good funder for, didn't get a look in because we just didn't have the money. I would say 80% of the things we found ourselves saying no to, we'd have liked to have said yes to, we just didn't have the money for it, and they weren't a priority. We're still funding capital work, but you've really got to be clear when you come in with a capital ask. That's for things as opposed to people, why that's needed, where else you've looked for funding, and how that building and that physical thing will help you, or tangibly help make a better place for the people that live there. And we're very specifically looking around early action, so projects that help people early, catch people early. Whilst we find ourselves increasingly funding basic needs services, we are funding food banks. We're looking at food poverty. We're looking at mental health problems. We'd like to be funding projects that catch people early, that prevent these problems happening, as opposed to having to be so reactive. But we also recognise that, given the current climate, we are where we're at. Our priorities in response to the pandemic: we will continue to support people in communities most adversely impacted. And when I say most adversely impacted, that can be by type of community, type of project, area. Some of the areas locally have been hit harder. Certainly some communities have been harder hit in terms of their demographic, in terms of deprivation. We know that we're in an area where there are pockets of really severe deprivation, and funding has been put in there to fund frontline services to try and support those communities in recovery from COVID, and we want to continue to do that. Now, in terms of our current funding offer, I think lots of people will have already applied. There is a kind of natural progression in that you might apply for an Awards for All. Now, Awards for All is specifically under £10,000. We're not connected to Awards for All particularly. They're not based in the local patches. We don't talk to each other before we fund things. It's not a kind of seed corn approach. If you're looking for a seed corn approach where you're looking to fund things early on for a small amount and then come back to us, talk to us about that anyway. Talk to us at Reaching Communities about that, but also be talking to your local community foundation, your local authority, because there's a partnership way of approaching that too. All applications need to go through our website. That's regardless of whether you're applying for under 10,000 or over 10,000, and they will then come to those particular teams. But if you have a specific communication requirement and what you see on our website doesn't work for you, then please feel free to come to us via the phone or an email and ask us to support you with that. We can have conversations pre-application and support you. So National Lottery Awards for I'm going to skip over. I think most of you know about it. It's grants from £3,000 to £10,000. Applications are online, and it's a response to one question. You answer one question, and you typically get an answer within 12 weeks. Reaching communities and partnerships is where I sit. And just apologies if I stop talking for a minute. It's because I'm going to probably have to open the window and shout at the window cleaner to not. I'm sat right in front of a window, and I'm aware it's going to get very noisy in a minute. So we can fund individual organisations and partnerships, and that's grants from 10,000 or more, running for up to 5 years. I would say you can apply at any time. There's not a closed loop. There's not a deadline. And applications, again, are online with those other formats available. When it says 5 years, I would say that our average grant is somewhere between 150 and 300,000, generally over 3 years. If we're looking to go more than that, if you go over £500,000, it goes to our England panel, which is a very complicated, there's no barrier to that process, but it becomes a lot harder to get your funding. And a lot more complicated. And it also brings us to the 5 years. If averagely we get asked for 3 years, if you can demonstrate that 5 years would give you longer term sustainability, that it would support your organisation to do something really unique and really well, then 5 years are now considered again. They weren't for a little while, but they are. What we will fund is direct project costs and project related costs. We can fund organisational development. I've had several grants over the last year where we've actually added significant sums, somewhere between 5,000 and 15,000, specifically for your learning, so for evaluation or to bring in an independent person to support you with strategic direction. We can cover core, so we can cover your running costs. We can cover your fixed running costs, including salaries, rent. Right, give me 1 sec. I'm just going to, hold on. Sorry, I'm just on a call. Could you? Thank you. Sorry about that. So you can apply any time for those, come in for any of those costs. Capital costs, again, we are accepting capital requests, but there is a challenge there in proving that is people in the lead and it's a community project. It isn't just fixing your church roof because the church needs a new roof. We want to know why it needs a new roof and who that roof is going to benefit. Who can apply? So I think there was talk earlier about self-employed people. That's a definite no for us. You have to be a voluntary or community organisation, a registered charity, a constituted group or club, or a not-for-profit. So being registered is helpful. If you're on the journey to registration, please come and talk to me, because that's something we can support. We had during the coronavirus support, we weren't able to support non-registered charities because it wasn't our money, it was government money, but we can talk to you about that. So we can't fund individuals or sole traders, companies that pay profit or dividends to directors, and we need to see best practice in terms of governance. So you need to have at least 2 trustees who aren't married, living at the same address or related by blood. That's fine if you have trustees who are. We know lots of our user-led organisations were set up by founder members who are exactly in those circumstances, and that's fine, but bring in other support, bring in other governance, bring in other trustees to help you demonstrate the strength of your organisation. And it does say here one organisation can't apply on behalf of another, and that's true, but you can come in as a partnership. So one partner can lead on an application with funding included to support another partner. It's just that, for example, RVA can't put in a funding request for Littlegate Farm or another organisation within Rother. You have to, the organisation benefiting from the funding has to be one of the applicants. The application process, you'll be glad to hear, has got a lot simpler. You visit our website, check you're eligible, and you apply online. The online application can be paused at any time, so you're not timed out. It isn't that stressful situation where you're trying to answer the questions before the computer chucks you out. It asks a very small amount of information. It's almost an expression of interest. And I'll go through that in the next slide. And then the process series, you would then receive an unsuccessful email or a request for extra information. confusingly, that request for extra information is called invite to apply. So you would apply, and then if we like your application and we think it's a fit, you will then be invited to fully apply, which is when we ask you for budget information and more detail. Once that, you can submit that extra information, and you can have a call or a meeting with me or the other funding officers if that helps. We would then confirm completion of your full proposal, and a decision after that probably takes somewhere within a month. So we have funding panels monthly, and it's a case of getting your information back in time for that deadline. So when you come in with that initial proposal, this is what we're going to ask you. Who are you? What do you do? What you'd like to do, and that can be continuing your core offer, or it can be a project. Where that work will take place, and where the beneficiaries live. How you'll involve your community in developing this idea, and how you already have. How your work fits in with other things locally. So that's other partners, other organisations. Is there any duplication? There can be duplication, but we need to know why. Who your beneficiaries are. And I think when we're talking about voluntary organisations, often your beneficiaries are also your volunteers, because we all know that meaningful volunteering helps everybody, including volunteers. How much money you need. So we'll want an overall amount of how much, and a very outlined brief budget. So is it for staff? Is it for core costs? Is it for equipment? We don't need a detailed breakdown at this point at all. And how long you want the money for. Is it 1 year, 5 years? If it's eligible and we like it and it's a good fit with our priority, we'll ask you for more information, which is when you get the invite to apply email. And that asks you for more detail about your proposal, your budget, and overall of your organisational finances, and a recent bank statement, quite simply so we can verify you if we're going to be paying any money in. What I will say here is, if you don't get invited to apply at that stage, if your application may be eligible and a good fit with our priorities, and you may still not get progressed at that stage. And that's simply because whilst we're trying very, very hard to fund a broad range of projects in support right across the country and right across the sector, it remains, the process remains competitive. I was having to say no last year to things that I would like to have said yes to, based on the fact that we didn't have sufficient budget, or that we'd already funded something similar recently in that area. So please, if you get a no, treat a no as a not yet, a not now, not this. It's not a not never, it's not a not you, and talk to us and find out why and how we can work with you to try and see where else we might be able to help. It doesn't mean it was a bad idea. Once you're successful, and this is, I think we can go through this quite quickly because it's very well explained once you get through, but we'll return your letter, we set you up, and then your funding starts to come to you, and we come to you for project reporting and evaluation. Usually, depending on the size of your organisation and how much risk there is, somewhere between quarterly, 6 monthly. And that might be a call, it might be a visit. We don't expect anyone to spend our funding writing lengthy reports for the lottery anymore. You'll be glad to hear. If you're writing a report for somebody else, send it to us. If you're doing a press release, you can send us that. If you've made a video about how brilliant you are, you can send us that. And if you want me to come and visit you and talk to you, we can do that. But we will need to see with that a spreadsheet which contains your budget, especially if you haven't managed to spend it all or you need any more. All the information is on our website. There's an advice line there, which is also helpful. The email you're seeing here is the London and South East team. That will be forwarded to a local funding officer. And some of you already have my personal email, and feel free to contact me that way.